They walked into the office full of hope, Marcus and Tasha Green, a young black couple with 2 children and a dream bigger than themselves, a dream built on sacrifice, long nights, early mornings, pennies stretched into bricks, and prayers whispered when the world told them no. Their dream was to buy a home, not just any home, but the one on Maplewood Drive, the one with the big oak tree out front, the one with the wraparound porch, the one they had driven past for months saying one day that will be ours. They had saved, they had planned, they had worked harder than anyone around them knew, and now they finally had the means, the kind of means most people never imagined, because Marcus's business had just landed a contract that changed everything, and Tasha's boutique had taken off beyond her wildest hopes. They weren't just qualified buyers, they were cash buyers, ready to purchase without a loan, without hesitation, without delay. But when they stepped into that office, when they introduced themselves to the realtor, a man named Douglas with slick hair, a polished smile, and eyes that told a different story, they were not met with excitement or respect, they were met with dismissal, with condescension, with a quiet cruelty that too many have felt and too few will admit exists. Douglas looked them up and down, his smile tight, his voice syrupy sweet but cutting underneath. "I'm sorry, but that home is already under strong consideration, and frankly, I'm not sure it would be the right fit for you. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable looking in a different neighborhood, something more within reach." His words dripped with arrogance, with prejudice cloaked in professionalism, and though Marcus and Tasha smiled politely, inside their hearts burned, because they knew what he meant. He wasn't questioning their money, he was questioning their worth, their right to exist in that neighborhood, their right to claim the dream they had worked for. Tasha asked calmly, "We'd still like to make an offer, if possible," but Douglas shook his head, chuckling as if amused. "Offers are complicated, financing is tricky, I just don't want you to be disappointed when the seller chooses a more qualified buyer." More qualified, the words hung heavy in the air like smoke, as if their skin erased every credential, every dollar, every sacrifice. Marcus thanked him, but his jaw was tight, his fists clenched when they left the office, their children asking innocently from the back seat, "Mama, did we get the house?" And Tasha swallowed the lump in her throat as she said, "Not yet, baby. But don't worry, we will." Because they weren't going to give up, not after coming this far, not after surviving worse storms than a smug realtor with a crooked smile. What Douglas didn't know was that Marcus and Tasha weren't alone. Their community stood with them, their pastor, their friends, their clients, people who believed in their dream. And when Marcus told the story that night at dinner, his phone lit up with messages, one friend connecting him directly to the seller's attorney, another introducing him to the title office, and by morning, the Greens had bypassed Douglas completely, walking straight into negotiations with the seller himself, a kind older man named Mr. Harris who had no idea what Douglas was doing in his name. When Marcus explained, Mr. Harris's face turned red with anger. He said, "What? He refused to show my home? That's not his decision, it's mine, and I'll sell to whoever I want, especially a family like yours that clearly values it." The next week, papers were signed, money transferred, keys placed in Tasha's trembling hands as tears rolled down her cheeks. They had done it, they had bought the house outright, no mortgage, no waiting, no barriers, cash in hand, dreams secured. And when they pulled into the driveway, neighbors peeked through blinds, shocked to see the Greens carrying boxes onto the porch, shocked to see the children running across the lawn, shocked that the family they thought would be rejected had arrived as the new owners, rightful and undeniable. But the sweetest moment came 2 days later when Douglas showed up, still smug, still certain he was in control, carrying brochures for alternative neighborhoods, ready to steer them away again, only to stop cold when he saw Marcus on the porch swing, keys dangling in his hand, smiling wide. "Morning, Douglas, thanks for your advice, but we won't be needing those brochures after all. We already bought it, cash." The look on Douglas's face was priceless, his mouth falling open, his arrogance crumbling, his power snatched away in an instant, neighbors watching from across the street as justice unfolded in real time. Tasha added softly but firmly, "You thought we didn't belong here, but let me tell you something, we don't just belong here, we're going to thrive here, because home isn't about who you think is worthy, it's about who builds it with love, with sacrifice, with honesty." Douglas stammered, turned pale, muttered excuses before scurrying back to his car, his empire of discrimination cracked, his reputation about to face questions he couldn't answer. And that night, under the same oak tree they had admired for months, Marcus whispered to his wife, "We turned their no into our yes, and that's the story of our lives, isn't it?" And she smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Always has been, always will be." Justice had been served, dignity restored, the underdogs triumphant, the tables turned in the most poetic way, because nothing silences arrogance faster than undeniable success, nothing cuts deeper than the moment the underestimated rise higher than those who mock them, nothing shines brighter than truth revealed in the face of lies. But just as the Greens settled into their new home, just as they believed the storm had passed, something darker began to brew, because Douglas wasn't just embarrassed, he was enraged, his pride shattered, his livelihood threatened, and men like him do not fall quietly. He sat in his office late at night, pouring whiskey into a glass, staring at the Greens' paperwork, muttering to himself, "If I can't stop them from buying, I'll make sure they regret moving in." The camera lingers on his hand as he picks up the phone, dialing a number not listed in any business card, a voice answering from the shadows, "Yeah? What do you need?" And Douglas replies coldly, "I need a problem handled. I need that family gone." The narrator's voice grows tense, ominous, heavy with foreboding. The Greens had won the battle, but the war was only beginning, because their victory had awakened an enemy willing to cross lines they never imagined, and what Douglas unleashed next would not only threaten their new home, but their very safety. At first, life in the Maplewood house felt like a dream, the kind of dream Marcus and Tasha had built their lives around, the children laughing in the backyard, neighbors waving politely though still curious, and for a brief moment it seemed the storm had passed, but storms don't disappear, sometimes they just gather strength in silence, because while the Greens unpacked boxes and painted bedrooms, Douglas was making calls, his pride still bleeding from the humiliation of watching a black family claimed the very home he swore they couldn't have. In his mind it wasn't just about a lost commission, it was about control, about power slipping through his fingers, and he wasn't ready to let it go, not without a fight. It started subtly, strange looks from a few neighbors who once seemed friendly, cold stares replacing polite smiles, whispers carrying across fences, then came the letters slipped into the mailbox, and signed, cruel messages scrawled in shaky ink, "You don't belong here, this is not your neighborhood, leave while you still can." Tasha tried to shield the children from it, folding the notes quickly and tossing them away, but Marcus could see the worry in her eyes, could hear the tremble in her voice when she told him not to let it get to him, but how could it not, when every note was a reminder that someone wanted them gone? Then the little inconveniences began, the trash can mysteriously knocked over every morning, the car tires slashed one night when they parked in front of their own home, the sound of footsteps outside the window late at night with no one to be found when Marcus ran out to confront them, and though they called the police, the response was indifferent, a shrug, a casual, could be kids messing around, nothing to worry about. But Marcus knew better. Tasha knew better, because each incident carried the fingerprints of malice, and behind it all, they could feel Douglas's shadow looming. One evening, as Marcus walked to the end of the driveway to grab the mail, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street, windows tinted too dark, engine idling low, and though it drove off when he stared at it, the message was clear, they were being watched. That night, Marcus sat Tasha down, his voice steady but heavy, "They're trying to scare us, they want us to leave, but we're not going anywhere. We fought too hard, we came too far." Tasha nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I know, but Marcus, what if it's not just intimidation, what if it becomes something worse?" The children started asking questions, little voices carrying big fears. "Mama, why don't the neighbors like us? Why did someone draw on our garage? Why did Daddy stay up all night with the lights on?" And Tasha forced a smile, hugging them close, whispering promises of safety even as her own heart raced, because how do you explain to your children that hate sometimes wears a neighbor's face? Meanwhile, Douglas's plan was unraveling in the shadows. He had rallied a small group of like-minded residents, whispering poison into their ears, convincing them that the Greens moving in would lower their property values, would change the neighborhood, would bring in people they didn't want, and slowly, those whispers grew into a quiet alliance, homeowners meetings suddenly tense, votes swinging against Marcus and Tasha every chance they got, even on matters as small as a neighborhood block party. The Greens weren't just being excluded, they were being targeted. But Douglas wasn't finished, because intimidation and exclusion weren't enough for him. He wanted them broken, humiliated, forced to crawl out of Maplewood with their heads hung low, so he took it further, filing false complaints to the city about supposed code violations, calling the HOA to claim their yard was unkempt, accusing them of playing loud music at night when the house was silent. And while each complaint fizzled into nothing, the weight of it all began to press down on Marcus and Tasha, one battle after another, each one designed to exhaust them, to make them question if their dream home was worth the nightmare. But what Douglas never counted on was the fire inside the Greens, the resilience born from generations who had faced worse, who had endured more, and who had taught them that dignity is not something you hand over to bullies, it's something you protect at all costs. So instead of breaking, Marcus began documenting everything, every letter, every complaint, every incident, every face that stared too long from across the street. And quietly, he built a case that would one day shine a light so bright that no shadow could hide in it. One Sunday after church, Marcus stood in front of his family and friends, his voice steady but filled with passion. They think they can run us out, but this house is more than wood and brick. It's a symbol, a promise that our children can grow up knowing they belong anywhere they choose, not where someone tells them they're allowed, and I won't let anyone take that from us. His words sparked something, and soon, their community began to show up. Friends driving by at night to keep watch. Others helping repair the damage, even strangers online who heard their story offering support, donations, legal advice. Slowly, what Douglas thought would isolate them only strengthened their resolve, and while he grew more desperate, the Greens grew more united. But desperation is dangerous, and when Douglas realized his tricks weren't working, when he realized intimidation wasn't enough, he decided to take the most reckless step yet. One stormy night, as rain pounded the roof and the children slept upstairs, Marcus heard the faint sound of glass shattering, his heart racing as he grabbed a bat and ran toward the noise, only to find the back window cracked. A rock lying on the kitchen floor with a note tied to it. With shaking hands he unwrapped it. And the words scrawled in black marker made his blood run cold: "Get out now or next time it won't be just a window." The camera lingers on Marcus's face as he looks up toward the stairs, where his children are sleeping soundly, unaware of the danger creeping closer, his grip tightening on the bat, his chest rising with a mix of fear and fury, as thunder crashes outside. And the narrator's voice cuts in, low and chilling. The Greens had won the house, but now they were fighting for their safety, their peace, their very right to exist in the place they had claimed. Douglas had crossed a line, and what came next would shake the entire neighborhood to its core. They say fear is a weapon, sharper than knives, heavier than fists, more destructive than bullets. Because fear doesn't just wound the body, it infects the mind, it gnaws at the heart, it turns safe places into cages and peaceful nights into battlegrounds. And that's exactly what Douglas wanted. The Greens had fought hard to claim their dream home, had pushed past humiliation and prejudice, had stood tall with the strength of their community, but now they were in a different kind of fight. Not for contracts or signatures, not for dignity in the face of arrogance, but for safety, for peace, for the simple right to tuck their children into bed without wondering if tonight would be the night the shadows outside the window turned into something worse. Marcus stared at the shattered glass on the kitchen floor, the note still burning in his hands, its message pounding in his mind like a drum: "Get out now or next time it won't be just a window." His knuckles whitened as he gripped the bat tighter, his jaw clenched, his chest rising and falling with a fury that wanted to explode. But then, his eyes lifted toward the staircase, toward the small bedrooms where his children slept, and his anger gave way to something deeper, heavier: fear. Not for himself, but for them. Tasha entered quietly, her robe pulled tight around her, her face pale under the dim kitchen light. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling, "we can't ignore this anymore." She picked up the note, her hands shaking, tears brimming in her eyes. "This isn't just intimidation. This is a threat." He pulled her close, his arms strong but heavy with the weight of unspoken fears. "I know. But we're not running. Not from him. Not from anyone." The next morning, the Greens called the police again, holding out the note as proof that this wasn't just kids messing around. But the officer who arrived looked tired, uninterested, his notebook half empty as he shrugged and muttered, "We'll file a report, but without witnesses or cameras, there's not much we can do. Best advice? Maybe consider relocating." Relocating. The word cut like a blade. That was what Douglas wanted all along, and now even the people meant to protect them were pushing them toward it. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "We're not going anywhere," he said firmly, handing the officer back the useless piece of paper. But inside, he knew something had to change. They couldn't rely on the system. If they were going to survive this storm, they had to protect themselves. So Marcus got to work. He installed cameras on every corner of the house, motion lights that blazed against the dark, reinforced locks, and a security system that would alert him the second anyone tried to cross the threshold. He called friends from church, brothers who had grown up with him, men who knew what it meant to watch each other's backs, and together they began rotating night watches, cars idling at the curb, keeping an eye on Maplewood Drive while the Greens slept. Tasha, too, found her strength. She reached out to community leaders, to advocacy groups, to neighbors who still believed in decency. Soon, whispers of what was happening began spreading, not Douglas's lies, but the truth. And with truth came light, and with light came allies. But light also casts shadows. Because while some neighbors began to rally behind the Greens, others doubled down in silence. They didn't speak to Marcus when he waved, they turned away when Tasha smiled, they pulled their children closer when the Green kids laughed in the yard. And late at night, when the cameras caught the glow of headlights creeping slow past their house, Marcus could almost feel Douglas's smirk from somewhere in the darkness. Then came the escalation. It started with spray paint on the garage, "Leave." Marcus scrubbed it off with his son watching silently, small fists clenched in anger he didn't yet know how to carry. It continued with nails scattered across the driveway, popping both front tires on Tasha's SUV. She sat on the curb as the tow truck hauled it away, tears streaking her face, whispering, "They want to break us." And then, one night, it went further. Marcus was in the living room, scrolling through the security feeds on his phone, when he saw it. A figure in the backyard. Hooded, crouched low, moving toward the back fence. He jumped up, grabbing the bat again, racing through the house as the alarm blared. By the time he threw open the back door, the figure was gone, disappearing into the shadows. But on the ground by the fence, something glistened in the moonlight. A can of gasoline. Half empty. Marcus's blood ran cold. This wasn't about scaring them anymore. This was about destroying them. About burning their dream to ash. He called the police again, furious, demanding action. And this time, maybe because the evidence was too real, too dangerous to dismiss, they promised to assign patrols to the neighborhood. But Marcus knew better than to trust half-hearted promises. He slept little that night, his bat by his side, his ears tuned to every creak, every gust of wind. Tasha tried to stay strong, but the weight was crushing her. One night, after tucking the kids in, she sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she whispered, "Marcus, what if we made a mistake? What if this house isn't worth it?" He reached across the table, his hand covering hers, his eyes burning with both love and defiance. "It's not just about this house, Tasha. It's about everything it represents. If we leave now, we're teaching our children that hate wins. And I can't. I won't let them grow up believing that." The days stretched into weeks, each one a test of patience, of courage, of faith. But just when it seemed the Greens were beginning to adapt to the tension, to hold their ground against the storm, Douglas decided to strike harder than ever. It was a Saturday afternoon when it happened. The Greens were hosting a small gathering, friends, church members, people who came to show support. Laughter filled the air, children played in the yard, for once the house felt like the home they had dreamed of. And then the sound tore through the air. Bang! A single gunshot. Screams erupted, children crying, adults diving for cover. Marcus grabbed his son, pulling him down, shielding him with his body as Tasha clutched their daughter, her voice trembling with terror. The yard fell into chaos, neighbors rushing inside, people shouting, "Where did it come from?" The police arrived minutes later, searching, questioning, but finding nothing. No shooter, no weapon, no clue except a single shell casing left in the street like a calling card. That night, the Greens sat together in the living room, shaken but unbroken. The children were finally asleep, clinging to each other even in dreams, while Marcus and Tasha sat in silence, the weight of it pressing down on them like never before. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice low, steady, but filled with fire. "He wants a war. Then he's going to get one. But this time, we won't just defend ourselves, we're going to expose him." The camera lingers on his face, his eyes hard, his resolve unshakable. And then the narrator's voice cuts in, heavy, foreboding. The Greens had faced intimidation, vandalism, even threats of fire and gunshots. But Douglas had made one mistake: he underestimated the power of truth, of resilience, of a family unwilling to break. What came next would not only put Douglas's schemes into the light, but it would force the entire neighborhood to choose a side. And when the truth came out, nothing would ever be the same again. The screen fades to black, the sound of thunder rumbling in the distance, and the words appear. They say every storm reaches its breaking point, that moment when the clouds split open, when thunder turns to fire, when the battle is no longer whispers in the dark but a roar that shakes the earth. For Marcus and Tasha Green, that moment had arrived. The shot fired at their gathering was more than a warning, it was a declaration. Douglas wasn't hiding anymore. He wasn't satisfied with whispers, with shadows, with intimidation. He wanted a war. And now, the Greens were ready to give him one. Marcus spent the next week working around the clock. Every incident, every threat, every letter, every complaint, he pulled it together into a mountain of evidence. The cameras he installed, they had caught more than shadows. They had caught Douglas himself, late at night, spray can in hand, defacing the Greens' garage. They had caught his allies slipping notes into the mailbox. They had caught the black SUV circling the block, again and again, its plates tracing back to one of Douglas's closest associates. Tasha, meanwhile, reached out to a journalist, a woman from the local paper who had long covered stories of injustice, stories most people would rather keep buried. When she heard the Green story, when she saw the evidence, her eyes widened. "This isn't just harassment," she said. "This is a hate campaign. And if you're willing, I'll make sure the world knows." The Greens didn't hesitate. They were tired of being hunted in silence. It was time to drag Douglas's poison into the light. The story broke on a Thursday morning. Bold headline: Family targeted in neighborhood hate campaign, Realtor alleged as ringleader. Pictures of the vandalism. Quotes from Marcus and Tasha. Video stills from the cameras. Evidence laid bare for the entire city to see. By noon, the phones at Douglas's office were ringing off the hook. Clients canceling contracts. Partners demanding answers. Protesters standing outside with signs that read, "No hate in Maplewood," and "We stand with the Greens." But Douglas? He didn't crumble. He didn't apologize. He doubled down. That night, at a hastily called neighborhood meeting, he stood in front of a crowd of residents, his slick smile replaced by, "This family is destroying our community," he spat, his voice sharp, his words dripping poison. "They brought the media here, they brought the chaos, they're making us look like monsters. They don't care about this neighborhood, they only care about themselves." Some neighbors nodded. Some looked uneasy. Some, for the first time, spoke up. "No, Douglas," one woman said, her voice firm. "We've seen what you've done. We've seen the lies. This family belongs here just as much as anyone else. Maybe more." The crowd erupted, half in support, half in anger. The divide was clear now. There was no middle ground anymore. Maplewood was a battlefield. That weekend, the Greens woke up to find their street lined with cars, not of those who hated them, but those who supported them. Church members, co-workers, strangers who had read the story and refused to let hate win. They brought food, supplies, even volunteers to help repaint the garage, fix the broken window, restore what Douglas had tried to destroy. For the first time since moving in, Marcus and Tasha felt something stronger than fear, hope. But Douglas felt something else, rage. That night, in the shadows of his office, he slammed a bottle against the wall, shards scattering across the floor as he hissed, "They think they can beat me? They think a few cameras and a newspaper can undo me? No. If the system won't push them out, I will." He made a call. Not to neighbors this time. Not to whisperers and vandals. But to men who lived in darkness, men who didn't care about property values or community meetings, men who solved problems with fire and fists. And as the Greens slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, believing the worst had passed, believing their truth had finally defeated the lies, engines rumbled in the distance. Black trucks with tinted windows rolling slowed down Maplewood Drive, headlights off, carrying men who had no interest in intimidation anymore. They weren't here to scare. They were here to end it. Lights glowing softly from the upstairs windows, the oak tree standing tall, the porch swaying gently in the night breeze. Inside, Marcus holds Tasha close, whispering, "We made it through, love. We're finally safe." And then the sound of boots hitting pavement. Doors slamming shut. A shadow moving across the lawn. A figure holding something in his hand, a bottle, a rag stuffed inside, the glint of fire dancing against the glass. The narrator's voice cuts in, low, urgent, heavy with dread. The Greens believed the storm had passed. But Douglas had unleashed something darker than gossip, darker than prejudice, darker than fear. The battle for their home was no longer about words or threats, it was about survival. And the next move would shake not just Maplewood, but the Greens' very lives. The screen fades to black as the sound of glass shattering echoes, followed by the whoosh of flames sparking to life. They say fire reveals truth. It strips away illusions, exposes what hides in shadows, and forces everyone to see what was always there. On that night, when glass shattered against the Greens' porch and flames leapt into the air, truth came roaring out of the darkness. Marcus woke to the crackling sound, the smell of smoke burning his lungs. His eyes flew open, heart pounding, as the glow of fire lit up the hallway. "Tasha," he shouted, racing to the children's room. She was already there, clutching their son and daughter, her face pale, tears streaking down her cheeks as she whispered prayers under her breath. Together they rushed down the stairs, Marcus grabbing the fire extinguisher from under the sink, battling the flames that licked the porch railing. His arms trembled, his body shaking, but he fought like a man who refused to let hate take his home, his dream, his family. Neighbors began pouring out of their houses, some filming on their phones, others running with buckets of water, trying to help. Sirens wailed in the distance, red and blue lights growing closer. And through the chaos, one voice screamed louder than the fire itself. "Tasha's. This is Douglas. This is what he's done to us." The crowd turned, eyes wide, whispers spreading like wildfire through Maplewood Drive. And as if on cue, the Greens' cameras caught it all, the black trucks idling on the street, the hooded men retreating into the shadows, and Douglas himself, standing by his car, face twisted with rage, shouting orders. The footage spread faster than the flames. By morning, the video was everywhere, news stations, social media, headlines across the city. Hate crime caught on camera, Realtor orchestrates attack on black family. Douglas could no longer hide. The mask was gone, the truth laid bare. Police swarmed his office, his home, dragging him out in handcuffs as cameras flashed and reporters shouted. His empire crumbled overnight, licenses revoked, lawsuits filed, partners fleeing. The man who once smirked with untouchable arrogance now looked small, broken, powerless. But the story didn't end with Douglas. Because while he faced the justice system, Maplewood itself faced a choice. Neighbors who had once whispered in fear, who had looked away while the Greens suffered, now stood ashamed. Some knocked on the Greens' door, tears in their eyes, saying, "We're sorry. We should have spoken up sooner." Others brought meals, supplies, even money to repair the damage. The same community Douglas tried to twist into hate began to heal in the light of truth. And the Greens? They stood taller than ever. Marcus rebuilt the porch with his own hands, friends at his side. Tasha reopened her boutique, customers flooding in with more support than ever before. Their children, once frightened, now ran freely across the lawn, laughter echoing louder than the echoes of fear. One evening, weeks later, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold, Marcus sat on that rebuilt porch swing, his daughter curled against his chest. Tasha stepped out with 2 glasses of sweet tea, her eyes shining with quiet pride. "We did it," she whispered. He nodded, his gaze on the oak tree swaying in the breeze. "We didn't just survive, Tasha. We proved that no matter how loud hate screams, love speaks louder. That's our legacy. That's what our children will remember." The narrator's voice swells, powerful, unshakable. The Greens had faced every weapon thrown against them, prejudice, intimidation, violence, and yet they stood, unbroken, unshaken, unafraid. Their story was not just about a house, but about dignity, about resilience, about the unshakable truth that home is not given by others, it is claimed by those who build it with love. Douglas tried to burn them out, but instead, he lit a fire inside them that will never be extinguished. The camera pans upward, the image of the Greens' home glowing under the evening sun, the oak tree standing strong, neighbors gathered on the lawn in solidarity. And then the narrator delivers the final words, heavy with power. Because in the end, hate always destroys itself. But love builds forever.